Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to this week's session of the G Sessions. This is the fifth and final edition of our first season. And today we have a very special guest, which I will tell you more about. The first season will culminate in 10 days on August 22nd, when we will come together and share. You will all be able to share your G status with us in a Zoom online workshop. So today we have an extremely special guest, and I'm sure you're all excited to meet her as well as I am. Let me try and invite her in. I think she is about to join us. Hi, Bitta.
Hi.
I was just telling everybody about how excited I am to have you here.
Excited to be here.
Great, wonderful. I'm just going to take a minute and then just introduce you, okay? Because I know who you are, but I want everybody to know who you are. So Bitta Mostofi is the commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs in New York City. It's MOIA for short. We all know it as MOIA. And it's an extraordinary office which not enough people know about. Under Bitta's leadership, MOIA has created programs and policies to advance the integration of immigrant New Yorkers into the city's civic, economic, and cultural life. Some 1.2 million New Yorkers, incredible, that you've helped with government identification services and a greater sense of belonging to the city. It's a huge task, no doubt. And particularly important, I think, in a time right now when there's an intense anti-immigrant rhetoric from the federal level and from various parts of the country as well. And you have led New York City's efforts to ensure that immigrant families have access to the services and resources they need and deserve while fighting back against policies that negatively impact New Yorkers. Wow, I can just imagine what your day of work is like. And previous to that, you were an attorney. You studied as an attorney, correct? And you decided to move into community organizing, which is a similar path that I took, going from my work as studying political science to community organizing. So I understand the commitment that's involved in all that. And so you've been involved on advocating on behalf of immigrant crime victims seeking U.S. visas and going before the city and Department of Homeland Security. So what I understand in terms of your G status is that you are the proud daughter of Iranian immigrants. And that's wonderful. I have connections with that as well, and that you have that you have worked with refugees from Iran and Iraq, as well as, I'm sure, other people. That's the short version, correct?
That is the only correction I would say, is that I was a community organizer before I became a lawyer. So my trajectory was more kind of coming back full circle.
So where were you community organizing, just to get a little background?
Sure. You know, community organizing has always been, I think, a part of my world and the focus of my work. I would argue that I started community organizing in high school and continued to do various kinds of community organizing through my college and legal education, mostly in Chicago, which is where I grew up. I went to school, and when I came to New York City, I actually ended up doing a lot of community organizing, both in the Muslim community here, but also more specifically in my own community, in the Iranian community.
Wonderful, wonderful. I know how fulfilling that is. So tell us a little bit about MOIA. Give us a little bit of a portrait of immigrant New York, if you can, and then tell us about this incredible office that you're running.
Yeah, I mean, immigrant New York is an incredible thing. You know, we call ourselves the ultimate city of immigrants, and that's true for many reasons, no less because nearly 40% of our city's population is foreign born, which is a remarkable thing when you recognize that that's over 3 million people that are foreign born and live in our great city across our 5 boroughs and call themselves New Yorkers. New Yorkers hail from all over the globe. You know, we estimate, and this is likely a very, very low estimate, that there are about 200 languages spoken across our city.
Wow.
That people have been here for many, many generations, or they're new arrivals, and that they have many different immigration statuses. So, you know, when we say New York or New Yorkers, you can't say that without truly meaning a city of immigrants. And New York's immigrant community live across all 5 boroughs. The borough of Queens in New York is literally the most diverse place on the planet.
Wow.
Immigrants hailing from Bangladesh and Korea and Mexico and Ecuador and, you know, you name it, all the Philippines. It's just an incredibly diverse community. So it's a true pleasure to be able to work alongside so many different communities, cultures, and people, and to think about, which is a real huge part of our job, how do you consider these differences, but as they make us sort of whole as New York, how do you ensure that as people come here, we're welcoming them in all of the right ways, including them in the work that we do and the resources that our city provides, so that not just as individuals they can thrive and grow and reach their fullest potential, but that as a city, and you sort of said through my bio, right, our economic, our civic, our social and cultural lives are fulfilled in the richest possible way.
Mm-hmm. I'm just thinking about what you're saying and how, you know, immigrants like us come here because it's a nation of immigrants, and to see what in fact has happened to the language and the idea of what an immigrant is, and the contributions that they and we will continue to make to this country and to its demonization. I wonder if this kind of immigrant office is available in other cities, or is New York a kind of symbol to the rest of the country? Like, how do you relate to other places in America?
Well, we're competitive, certainly as New Yorkers, but we
Right.
not the only office. I actually have the pleasure. Our mayor is chair of a coalition called Cities for Action that I have the pleasure of helping to lead. That includes cities from around the country, up to about 200 mayors who believe in pro-immigrant and inclusive policies, who believe in advocacy at the federal level for comprehensive immigration reform because of the experiences that we have at the local level. And so these are cities from the city of Austin, Seattle, Chicago, and Houston, and Tennessee, and Cook County, so many across our country that collectively we work to ensure that the voices of mayors and the experiences at the local level, which are really the heart of people's lives and communities, are heard at the federal level when we talk about immigration policy. So we're not the only office. Many of the cities that I named and many more have welcoming offices or offices of immigrant affairs, or are starting their offices. Through our coalition, we've helped start 2 offices in the last couple of years. And so It's really, really an incredible cohort of people across the country who are doing this work. I'm happy to gloat that we're the largest office of such nature in the country, and certainly that's no small part to the, as I said, the volume of immigrants or the scale of immigrants here in our city.
Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you a little bit about our project, the G Project. It started a few years ago, and its initial focus was the African diaspora. And I was working with the Black Institute, Bertha Lewis, an extraordinary community organizer who you may have heard of. Yeah, extraordinary woman. And the focus was to start looking at the narrative of the African diaspora from the point of view of immigration, because we'd always looked at Black America from the point of view of race. And so working on that, and then suddenly the immigration conversation turning sour with the last federal election, and the turning against immigration, it suddenly appeared to us that this is a conversation that needed to be had, that this country is truly at a turning point in its identity, and that finally the conversation about who we are as a nation of immigration should become something that is an ongoing dialogue, and people who don't know each other should find ways to know each other. So we came up with, being artists, we came up with a very simple concept, which is the G. And the G represents generation. And so if the idea is that we're all Gs, we are all Gs. If we're born elsewhere, we're G0s. If we're third generation Americans, we're G3s. If we are one of the early white European settlers who perhaps came with the enslaved Africans, you could be a G17 or a G16 or a G18. So if you take 20 years and you multiply by 17, you have about 350 years. And even indigenous folk, and all the tribes that, 1.5 million to 2 million tribes that populated this continent are anywhere from G437 to recent tests that show that they could be 600 generations back. So now, because of DNA, we can actually say things like that scientifically. So this kind of very simple way for people who don't know each other to start making a connection and to show that, hey, we're all connected this way. So obviously, we were happy to invite you to tell us about the office, which we care so much about what you're doing. But at the same time, you yourself are part of our G story. So can you tell us a little bit, your own background, your G status, share with us a bit?
Sure, yeah. So my family is from Iran. I am, I think, according to your G metrics, first generation born here in the United States.
You're a G1.
I'm a G1. Very recently after my parents came. And so we came, stayed, and I grew up in the city of Chicago. And I've talked a little bit about what that was like. It wasn't a very large Iranian community, though they found each other, right? People tend to find ways to get connected to the people from their homelands who speak their language and retain their culture and pride of where they came. Chicago is a very deeply segregated city. Mm-hmm. And when we initially arrived, we were living on the south side of Chicago. And, I pretty readily, because of just children, I think are especially skilled at their ability to understand or sort of see prejudice, right? Maybe we can't put the word to what we're seeing, but we understand it pretty intensely. And so, my parents were new arrivals. They had accents. They were learning to improve their English and learning how to navigate a whole new system and city. And so, we didn't feel white, quote unquote, and we lived in an intensely, as I said, segregated city where you could see the racial divide, you could see the division, but one in which we didn't relate to some of the experiences on either side, right? We didn't necessarily present fully a person who was Black, but we also didn't present, or certainly my parents, as somebody who were received as being white. And so that experience and sort of what came from it, which was, you know, sort of years of, I think, questioning that identity and not feeling fully included or understood, or having that sense of uncertainty about identity and place, is a big part of who I am, and kind of why I do the work that I do. And, you know, immigration, we often, I think, fall into this trap or tendency of doing this broad brushstroke over things as being seen as one thing or another, right? Positive or negative. And immigration is complicated. Most people don't, you know, willfully desire to leave their homes if they have comfortable lives, if they're able to care for their families and loved ones, if they're able to speak freely and exercise their point of view. It's difficult, right? Even for my parents that across sort of the spectrum of immigrants and immigration had an easier transition. It wasn't an easy choice, and it wasn't one that I would articulate as voluntary, right?
That's so important, what you're saying.
And so it's really important to understand that when we think about our country and we think about sort of the impact that immigration has on it, it plays such a central role to who we are as a nation, to what our economy looks like, to how innovation and creativity happens, to how the development of our culture and our communities happen. But it comes at an expense for some people, because we as a society haven't, you know, by any stretch of the imagination, perfected what it means to be a welcoming or inclusive place or culture, or even made it, frankly, easy. Like the work that I do feels can sometimes feel very basic, right? Is how do you reach people to make them aware of the resources that they're entitled to? How do you ensure that as somebody finishes that trajectory of immigration and becomes a citizen, that they're owning their rights to vote, right? And that they're taking that right and that civic participation seriously, and they're empowered to do so. All of that comes with intentionality. And so much of the barriers that we have seen elevated because of racism, because of a history of racism around immigration, be it Japanese internment or Chinese exclusion or post 9/11 practices, you know, we have not resolved that tension that we have as a nation of immigrants, in many cases as cities that identify as ultimate cities of immigrants or immigrant communities and cities, and embrace those values with the reality of how that plays out in people's daily lives.
Yes, it's the whole question of identity is just so complicated and fascinating. And I guess you get so many layers of it because you're meeting so many different communities all the time. And of course, even the, you know, the forced migration of African slaves is a form of forced immigration that is really at both the source of what this country is becoming, which is a nation of immigrants, you know, dependent and hopefully welcoming on others to build it, but at the same time a country that has multiple identities at the same time, and how does it contain that? And I think considering we're a very young country compared to Iran or India or Iraq or so many other countries, we're still, I like to think of the United States as basically at an adolescent stage in terms of the macro history, you know, of nations and civilizations. And so we still have a lot to learn, and I think it's for people like us and the generations after us to etch out and to create the future together. So I'm seeing, oh my goodness, we're already at 20 minutes and we're just starting. Well, one more question. Do you have a particular experience from a culture, an immigration culture, another immigrant group, somebody different from yourself who shared something with you that really you carry? I know we all do, but do you have it in mind?
Oh yeah, I often say I feel like some of my richest experiences have been traveling the globe, and then I feel like I've done additional travel around the globe in my different professions, be it practicing immigration law, where I had clients from you name it, from Cameroon, from Trinidad and Tobago, from Cuba, from Brazil, from Iraq, right, all over. I have felt very fulfilled in understanding the world and in feeling a part of the world through the eyes of the people that I represented, and now through the eyes of the people that I serve as a public servant in the city that we live, and the import of and responsibility that I certainly believe that I have and that a government has to the people in our communities, to both listen and understand their experiences, but also to be responsible and responsive to them. I talked about empowerment as a key goal or priority that certainly I have, but also one of reaching greater equity and justice for people, of recognizing some of the challenges and limitations, but also just the immense richness that people and diversity bring to us. So
Absolutely.
it's difficult for me to hone on one person or one experience. I think I'm lucky to have been really just honored with the presence of so many different people across so many different experiences. And I would say most acutely in the last several years, since the start of the Trump administration, I definitely experienced this as an immigration lawyer that represented asylees and refugees, but the just resilience and the joy and love that immigrants bring to their daily lives is a remarkable thing that to witness and to be able to say I was a small part of is truly an honor.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Absolutely an honor. And it's an honor to have you. Now, did you get the message to bring something to share with us? Yes.
I did get the message. I don't know if I will fulfill it to exactly the way that you were hoping, but I brought a picture of my parents.
Oh, great. Yes, absolutely.
And this is, to me, really the connector to my immigrant story and experience. They have done, I think, a remarkable job.
Clearly.
But in particular, in, raising us in such a way where I very much feel as Iranian as I do American. I think that that's a difficult thing to do, to hold the bonds of your history and your family, your culture, while you have a foot in two places. You're between two worlds or two nations, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the ability to do that is a true commitment because it's difficult. And I have even more, I think, appreciation for it now because I'm a mother, and I am trying to retain that bond for my daughter to have to her Iranian roots and her family and her culture. And it is something you have to be incredibly intentional and thoughtful about. So I feel very grateful to them, and they really are, for me, the symbol of that tradition and heritage. And I owe all of how I experience being an Iranian American to them.
Wonderful answer, and thank you for sharing that. I hear the thunder outside. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my Wi-Fi, which I'm so happy to have. But definitely to be continued. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And I read in your bio that you were born in Iraq. Is that right?
Yes, I was born in Baghdad and we left when I was 10. So that's a whole other story. We'll share
Yeah,
another time.
for another time. But I would say I think I got my seasoned activist roots in Iraq. And so
Ah,
certainly another conversation for us to have,
absolutely.
the Iraqi people, for that experience.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.